Welcome back. We're going to talk through the solution to this problem, but the first thing I want to talk through is an anti-pattern for the solution. Something that I don't want you to fall for, that I have fallen for in the past. If we take a look at the queries that are running, I'm running SP who is active again, and wow, everybody's really been blocked for a long time now. The SQL server for this guy, I mean, look how faithfully it's been sitting there with its lock waiting. SQL server's just like, I will wait for you just until I can go. But one thing that I might be tempted to do is to look at the query for this guy, the blockee. And I do that again in SP who's active just by clicking on the query text. I might say, hey, can I change this query so that if somebody else is holding a lock on the table, it can just say, hey, I'm going to go right past you. I could take the text of this query and say an easy way I could do that is by taking the text and adding a no lock hint onto it like this. See the no lock hint right here? And the reason you might do this is you're going to find blog posts and forum entries all over the internet saying, hey, you can make your query faster. You can make your query quester. That's what I was originally going to say. You can get this to sneak by blocking by saying, hey, don't you take out any locks. And that sounds good at first, right? And in fact, if I run this guy, that blocker is still running. We saw that in SP who's active, right? Like, it's still there. Here's our blocker. If I add this no lock hint and run this, wow, it snuck right past. It didn't get blocked after I added that no lock hint. This is the exact same thing, the no lock hint is, as saying I want to set the transaction isolation level for my session to read uncommitted. No lock equals read uncommitted. The un is very critical there because the default isolation level for SQL Server is read committed, right? So we're saying read uncommitted. The reason that you don't want to do this, or that you almost always don't want to do this, is when you say either no lock or read uncommitted on your query, what you're saying to the SQL Server is, I don't care if the data that you return to me is correct. I want you to just do a read, and even if someone else is changing the exact data that I'm reading, even if they're like in the middle of changing it, just show me whatever you got right now. And right now, that data is being changed. That's the reason that other query was blocked, is that the other query is running an update that is changing a bill to customer ID. It's taking the bill to customer IDs that are set to 1 and it's changing them to 2, but it hasn't committed yet. So when I run my dirty reads, data is not necessarily, and in fact is incorrect query, it's saying I only see the 2s. Now, what if this was in a report run by my CEO and she's looking at important billing data? And what if somebody goes in and kills the query that's doing the update because it never committed, right? And this is a very likely thing that happened. If it's just stuck and it's in a what's called doomed transaction, it could roll back, and then she runs the report again 5 minutes later and she sees completely different data. She might say, what the heck is going on here? Especially if something just doesn't look right, right? So we don't, most of the time, and I say most of the time because there are some databases where I've had people say, actually, it doesn't matter if the data is wrong. We just want a rough idea. And if some people get wrong information, it's okay. I have had those cases, but they are very, very rare. And sometimes when I say, really? And ask some questions about it, the answer turns around and becomes, actually, no, it does need to be right. Most of the time, 99% of the time, when we bother to put our data in a relational database, we want the data to be correct. So don't just jump and throw no lock hints on these queries, because what you're saying is maybe people can start seeing wrong data depending on when they run stuff, and they may get real confused, and then they may get real upset. If we just put no lock hints on these queries, or say read uncommitted isolation level, we aren't thinking at all about solving the cause of the problem. And we're just sort of putting a really dangerous, a risky workaround in place that can come back to haunt us. So I want you to be really careful of this as a solution, because a lot of folks will just say, oh, don't worry. And you should worry if you use no lock. So we are going to reset our isolation level now to read committed, so that I'm not left in that dirty reads mode for the entirety of my demo. Well, let's talk more about the cause of what's going on, because we do want to figure out more about the cause. Let's look more closely at a couple of columns in SP who's active, really one in particular. For my query here, who's blocked, if I scroll to the right, there is a status column here in SP who is active. And note that it says that my blocker is sleeping. One interesting thing about that query, the update query, who's our blocker, is very often when we look at a situation like this and we see, hey, the first one isn't waiting on anything and the second one is blocked by it, it looks like this update just isn't done, like it's still running. And, maybe it's just a really long update. Maybe it has a lot of work to do. The way that you can confirm that very quickly is by looking at that status, and it isn't still working away on that update. It's taken a nap. It finished its update. What happened is that this session came in and it said, I want to begin a transaction, and it ran an update. And nothing else happened. At this point, it is sleeping because it's finished the update. SQL Server is waiting for it to come back and say, I'm done. It can say I'm done by committing the transaction, or it could say I'm done by rolling back the transaction. But it hasn't told SQL Server either one, and the SQL Server will not assume that it wants to do, one or the other. For all the SQL Server knows, maybe it wants to run more update statements or inserts or deletes and then commit everything as a whole in that transaction. It must wait and see. If, of course, whatever application ran this, if it has some sort of network issue or something makes it disconnect, then it'll be gone. And the SQL Server would be like, oh, well, I've got to roll you back because you didn't tell me and then you left. But as long as it's still here, we've got to wait. In the real world, in real environments, this can actually get fairly complicated because applications don't always want to constantly reconnect to the database server, and they use things like connection pooling so that they can open a connection, do a bunch of stuff on it for one thing, and then reuse it for other things, so connections may stay open for a while. That status column is really, really useful for telling us a lot about the nature of the blocking. We have a sleeping session who is holding locks and blocking this other session. And we know that it's a lock wait because of the wait type on the other session. We can use an extra parameter in SP who is active to see really interesting detailed information about the lock waits if we want. We can say get locks equals 1 on SP who is active. And now, if I scroll on over for my blocker, I can click on this locks information and open up a big old lock graph with information for every database it has locks in about the objects where it has requested locks or been granted locks, right? It's either waiting or been granted. And I can see that in the Wide World Importers database, it has locks on customers.sales and then customerarchive.sales. And I can see exactly how many of them and of what type. Now, as you can see, this is kind of a lot to wade through. I don't look at the lock graph all the time when I'm troubleshooting because it takes a long time to look through and it can be a little tough. On our blocked session here, session 62, it might be easiest to just see where is it waiting for locks. And I'm going to click on that. Sometimes if you're dealing with something real complex and it's a lot of code and you're like, okay, which part of this is it blocked on? This can be real useful just to say, I'm going to scroll through here and I'm going to look for where the request status equals wait on the blockee. And I can see that it's the primary key of sales.customers. Happen to know from past experience that that is a clustered primary key. It's the clustered index of the table. And there is, a key that we know that the ID is being updated there. And we are doing this big group by. We need to know the right information for all those IDs. So we're getting blocked there. Blocked. Well, all right. So we have learned more about what's causing our problem. Not everything about the solution, but we know that there's something going on with our query who updates sales.customers and sets the build to customer ID who's changing that. There's something about the application or person who runs that under SW oops that left it in a state where it has an orphaned transaction. It did begin tran and did an update, and then it just went to sleep. We're going to have to do more work to track down the full root cause. Temporarily, I'm going to go ahead and let's see, it is session 57. Temporarily, I am going to go ahead and kill that off. Now, like I said, anytime we kill something, there's always a risk that the rollback is going to be long and painful for us, for our customers, for the group of people that gathers behind us at our desks because it's an emergency and it's still rolling back, right? In this case, I was lucky. If I run kill again against my session and I say with status only, it'll tell me, are you still waiting through your mostly single-threaded rollback? In my case, it's not an active process ID anymore. It has completed its rollback. And if we run SB who is active again, it has cleared up. Now, be very, very cautious. Like I said, before you kill something, it's better if you can figure out whoever ran the query and say, can we cancel it from the caller? Do you know how much it modified? Whenever I need to kill something, I always want to make sure that if there is a really long, painful rollback, I have authorization for that too. So let's dig in more to finding what are the causes of orphaned, doomed transactions. What are the causes of these sleeping sessions holding locks? Let's look at what can cause that and how to fix it over in the slides.